G'day everyone and welcome to my ANZAC portrait series. I'm artist Wayne Dowsent. This is my latest ANZAC portrait featuring Nick Carter. So ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy this wonderful video. It's part 2 of our interview with Mr. Nick Carter.
Got to New Guinea, they didn't seem to have any idea what was going on because there were two brigades in the front. There was the 21st Brigade, which was part of our division, and my own brigade, the 25th Brigade. And we went to a plantation outside of Moresby that night, Koitaki Plantation. And it was during the night that there was a bit of an alarm raised, and we were supposed to go out and patrol, but they changed it, and the 27th, the South Australian Battalion in the other brigade, they were selected to go out. Now, I don't know how far we were from Owers Corner. That's the start of the Kokoda track, not Owens, Owers, O-W-E-R-S. That was good. And they went out on patrol. The message came back. The Japanese had reached Urubara Ridge. Now, when you get up the Golden Staircase, which is the first biggest mountain climb from Owers Corner, the 1,000 steps of the Golden Staircase, we followed up, and that leading patrol had located Japanese on Urubara Ridge. And from Urubara Ridge you can see the lights of Port Moresby. But there ensued a fight between our patrol and the Japanese there, but we weren't quite sure of the numbers of Japanese. But we found out later that General Hori, the Japanese commander, had sent a company of men on. He wanted them, he put a limited time impossible from where they were on the other side of the island, and just landed at Gona and Buna. He wanted them to get there, and he gave them limited rations to get there to Urubara Ridge, which was the last obstacle to get to Moresby. You go downhill run. Anyhow, we had this, the 2nd 27th, and we caught up with them, and we had this battle with the Japanese patrol. And for some reason, during the night, this leading patrol, the Japanese evacuated Urubara Ridge, and we didn't know why, but they'd run out of food. General Hori failed to give them enough food. So they start to retreat, and the other Japanese coming up behind them on the trail, well, we didn't run into them till we got to, I just can't think now what they were. Anyhow, further along the trail, the main body of the Japanese, and they were suffering the same problem, no supplies. And General Blamey, in all his great strategy, and that says we'll drop supplies to our troops. But the pilots had flown over the track and they couldn't see a thing or a dropping ground. And all of a sudden someone said, oh, the village of Manari, that wasn't that far from the start of the trail, we'll have the first drop there for food for us. Well, the blokes come down in the Douglas, they're kicking these cases out of the door of the Douglas DC-3. They're going everywhere, tins of bully beef, and a lot of them are bursting as they hit the ground. And the battalion doctor's standing there rejecting all the ones, because hot, humid, tropical country. He wasn't going to risk giving the troops food that would poison them properly. So, and the pile of the rejections is getting bigger and bigger. I think we finished up, we got about 1 can of beef each. So that was a failure, the first drop. And from there on, we had terrible trouble with supplies, not only food, but with ammunition. So what did they do? Someone said, oh, get mules, I'll carry the stuff. tried mules, that didn't work. So they've got the native carriers then, the fuzzy wuzzies, and they start to carry some food and that for us, but they weren't too reliable. At that stage, they were very frightened, as a lot of them had been aware that when the Japanese landed in the Gonabuna area, they'd destroyed their villages and everything. But they did favour serving with the Japanese, some of them, not many of them. Anyhow, with the supplies being a big thing, and the country getting worse as you mountains and mountains and mountains and higher mountains, we had a strong problem, a very bad problem, the wounded. And that became a real tragedy. As I suppose you've seen the poem, The Fuzzy Wuzzy Angels. And it was a terrible thing because normally in a battle, you have your troops going forward, you have an ambulance, what they call the ambulances following up in the desert, then you have what you call a CCS, they take them to, which is a casualty clearing station. From there they take them to an ADS, which is an advanced dressing station, and then if nothing can be done, they go to a general hospital. Now all we had in medical supplies was the battalion doctor. He had a satchel, small satchel, in which he had some morphine, a few other things like that. But when you saw gaping wounds in these body area, and even on the thighs and that, so our sergeant, one of our sergeants, got a burst of machine gun fire, and it took, there's an artery there, what they call the carotid artery, and the burst of machine gun hit everything except the artery. And here's this doctor, this is just one example I'm quoting, he's got no other thing other than this little satchel. Patched him up as best they could, and we thought, oh, he won't make it. But months later we found a copy of an old Port Moresby paper, and here he was, Sergeant, I can't think of his name now, Max something, coming down the gangplank of a hospital ship. He survived, and nobody thought he would. And these doctors did a marvellous job, these battalions. That's all they had, and they had the regimental 8 post fellas with them helping with the wounded. And we used to say to the doc sometimes, geez, he's got a bad wound, doc. Will he make it? Well, it's 2 days back to the nearest place. And they didn't make it, a lot of them. Team and rain most of the time. Makeshift stretchers, which the fuzzy wuzzies cut the saplings of the trees, and we'd give them a ground sheet for the body to be on. And all you could see these stretchers going past on the track, raining like hell, the water falling up. They used to put banana leaves over the wounded to try and shield them from the rain. But the rain coming down onto this, what's her name, and the water running off as the stretcher was tilted, there was more blood than water, you'd see. And we used to say, will he make it? Well, it's 2 days, you know, before they'll get there. People don't believe this, you know, because a lot of them didn't make it, and they fuzzies wuzzies used to take them off the stretcher and leave the body just on the edge of the track. Pioneers to come along later, recover it. But they were the hazards of the Owen Stanley Rangers, and people don't realise. I saw some terrible wounds, and I'm surprised that they made it. I don't know how they made it. I can remember a few incidents I'll never forget. When we were coming down from Denaki, that's the last village on the range, to Kokoda, It was November, that was it, because my birthday's in November. And Jack Rossiter, he was a fellow who always wanted to sing. And it's all a downhill run from Deneke down to Kokoda. And he was singing this song, and every time I hear it, I think of it. I'll be home for Christmas, because it was, if only in my dreams. And I thought, Jesus, Jack, you're going well. 2 days later, he was killed in action. And hit me more than, would have then. I just sort of, Jackie Rossiter, I'll be home for Christmas, if only in my dreams. You come a bit hardened to things after a while. I mean, first you see a lot of things you like to lay down and cry, but then afterwards you get hardened. It's a peculiar, it's hard to explain really, just, in fact after it's over you can't believe it yourself, what you've seen. It is. You can't believe it. Right. The casualty rate was over 3,000 on that campaign. The Japanese with 13,000. Now, if you want a good account of the Owen Stanley campaign, go and get yourself a book out the library. The Bone Man of Kokoda. It's a Japanese book written by a Japanese soldier, agreed to by the Japanese government and agreed to by the Australian government. And I've read books on war, but this bloke was really right down to, he was a soldier, and one of the worst battles on the trails was at Afogi, a little village called Afogi. And they were that close, and the battle was the 21st Brigade. We didn't get there till just towards the end of the battle because we were following them. But in this battle at Afogi, and this fella described it so well, he gives an account of everyone in his regiment, how they died, what caused their death, whether it was puncture wounds in the body region or the brain or whatever. And he listed all this. I don't know how he did it. It was remarkable. And there's one section there where he's fighting with an Australian soldier. They both dropped their weapons. He had a sword and the Australian only had a bayonet off the rifle. And they fought, and it's dynamic the way he explained this. And he said he finished up, he drove the sword through the Australian before he could get him with the bayonet. But the worst part of it, he says, all night he had this Australian lying beside him moaning. He never died straight away. And he explains this battle at Afogi, and it's the most dynamic thing I've ever read in a war. When you think of it, 3,000 buried at the war cemetery in Port Moresby. But when you compare it with the Gallipoli, not quite 8,000 there, but that was over 8 months. And 3,000 was a lot of casualties, and people don't know this at the war cemetery at Port Moresby, Banana War Cemetery it is. That's the greatest accumulation of Australian dead killed in battle than that even on the Western Front in World War I, because on the Western Front they just established little cemeteries, all over France and that. After Afogi, where I mentioned, we went down to Kokoda, but prior to Kokoda you come to a place called Isharava. Now Isharava was manned by boys, I think the eldest was about 19 Australian militia boys, and they held that Isharava place, which stopped the Japanese advancing any further at that stage. And they held it until one of the battalions from the 21st Brigade, the 2nd 14th Battalion, rushed in and helped them. and that's really stopped the Japanese there. They were getting further away from ammunition, they were getting further away from food because they couldn't get the supply ships in. And we got to Kokoda, and all the battle had finished at Kokoda with these kids at Isharava and that. So we moved on. That was the end of the trail. The Owen Stanley Ranges. You come down from Denakey down to Kokoda and you're on the lowlands then. No more mountains. And on those lowlands you had to be very careful of things like malaria. The government never thought of that. Blamey never thought of that. Because you're high up in an altitude and the ranges, no mosquitoes, see? But once you come down to the lowlands, everyone was contracting malaria. So we moved on from Kokoda. There was no battle there. The people say, oh, the Battle of Kokoda. There was no battle there. It was at Isharava, and those militia kids took hold of that. From Kokoda, all flat land, we came to a place called Garari, and that's where we did really have a battle. And by this time the 6th Division had been reformed, the 2nd 1st Battalion were with them, and when we got near Garari, they went to the right flank to a place called Oivi, O-I-V-I. That was the 16th Brigade, and we went this way in the hope of encircling the Japanese, but the Kamusi River was the bloody trouble there, and we thought, well, if the Japs stop us from getting to the Kamusi River, we're going to be buggered. Anyhow, I think we finished up, there was about 600 Japanese killed there, but not before they blew the bloody old bridge up, so we couldn't get across. The 6th Division, Tom's 2nd 1st Battalion, 2nd 2nd, 2nd 3rd, they couldn't get across the river at Oivi, and we couldn't get across the river at Garari. And there was quite a delay there. They had to get engineers. I don't know where they got them from. I think they flew them in from Moresby to put up a flying fox. One at a time they put us across this bloody river, and had a little bit of wood like that you had to sit on. You've got your bloody ammunition, you've got everything on, weapons and that. We lots of few blokes fell off into the river. And even General Horry, the Japanese general, he was scrambled. He stayed late there at Garari when the Japanese were retreating, and he thought they could get across the river. It was shallow further down, but he got drowned with two of his trying to get across the river. And we found, he had a big white horse, you know, Horry. He took it to New Guinea, but he didn't try and take it over the ranges. But we found the dead white horse in a creek later on. I think he must have shot it. So after Garari, we had the open, so we got across on the Flying Fox and what have you. We had, there was a 16th Brigade at Oivi. They went to Buna down the right track from a place called Saputa. We went to Gona that way. And when we got to Saputa there, they were putting up the first ADS hospital. Great big white tent, because you couldn't put a tent up in the ranges. You had that much land to work on, and they're putting up this tent for wounded that were expected from Gona and Buna battles. And two of the best doctors we had in the AIF was Dr. What was his name now? Surgeons. And you just can't think of their name. They got all this tent ready for operation and that. Red crosses all over it everywhere, all on the sides and the roof, and a Japanese plane came over, dropped the bomb, killed the two best surgeons we had in the AIF. I had to start all over again.
That must have been quite a devastating blow.
Oh, it was. Geez, I'm trying to think of these doctors' names, both. Oh, they're renowned surgeons in civilian life anyhow, but I just can't think of their names. So that's what the Japanese did. So we proceeded on to Gona. They went on to Buna. And that was really, when I think of it, the ranges were a bad thing, but the bloody coast was worse. The thing was, we were very short of troops at this stage, casualties and sickness. And we're up to about 3 months we'd been in now. And we would get old Tom Cotton, my colonel, he was terribly worried about the battalion, and the brigadier was also worried about the rest of the brigade, because intelligence told us that the Japanese convoys were coming over from New Britain to reinforce the Japanese at Gona and Buna. Well, we thought if they get there and we've been in 3 months and we're all sick and that, we're going to be wiped out. I couldn't imagine us going back over the trail again, retreating. And it got to a terrible stage there. They were entrenched in the village of Gona. We made 3 attempts to capture, we couldn't. And we sat out or built our foxtails in front of the Gona village, and it rained and rained and rained for 3 days and 3 nights. In the finish, the water in the foxholes was up to here. We stayed there for 3 days and 3 nights. Every now and again they'd fire a machine gun, but they couldn't see us. We're in the kunai grass and through high grass. And that's when it was really tough. And I'll never forget, it was the second night or the second day we were there in the front line of Gona. This is after we'd tried to capture it. The runner from battalion headquarters came down. I saw him coming, and he's bent over, so the Japs couldn't see him through the kunai. He said, "Nick, Tom Cotton wants to see." That was the colonel of the battalion. I said, "What the bloody hell do you want to see me for?" I said, "I'm just another bloody soldier." No, he says, "Come on, you've got to come up." So I went up to his little abode there, a tent he had right at the back of the trail. And he said, "Oh, Nick, I got some news they've been trying to get to you from Sydney. It was set in October, we're now in January." I said, "What is it?" "I regret to tell you that your father died." And he said, "That's all, I can't do any more about it, Nick," he said. And I just stood there and didn't sort of register with me. Well, he said, "Nick, get back to your post." Well, I was dumbfounded, and I just didn't sort of register at the time, because I'd been sitting out in a bloody foxhole there for 2 days and 2 nights in rain, and nothing seemed to penetrate other than keeping our mind on the job, sort of waiting for the Japs to burst through. And the next day I thought, no, that can't be true. I wondered about it the next day, sort of hit me. And I kept on thinking about it till I got back to Port Moresby. Well, I didn't get back. I got back to wherever it was before they took me. I collapsed. It took about 3 months to get that message to me. Well, that was the communication problem, in New Guinea. That was terrible communication. So that was another interruption and when I had to Gona. And I didn't think we'd ever get out of Gona, and I thought if these Japanese reinforcements land, we've had it. And the colonel knew that, Tom. Tom didn't cotton their colonel, he was a wonderful person. And he worried hell about his few men he had left. We didn't have many men left at there. When the reinforcements did finally come up from Oro Bay, and we'd been calling for reinforcements for the last month and couldn't get any. They sent some poor buggers up there at one stage as reinforcements, and you know where they got them from? They were handling cargoes on all the waterfront around Sydney, you know, military cargo. Never fired a rifle, never had any training, and they sent them up to New Guinea. And of course, no training, no officers with them, well, no trained officers. And they turned away and ran these blokes. They couldn't help it in one particular situation. And that's where Blamey got the term, the AIF is running like rabbits. It was these kids they sent up and never had any training. He was responsible for that.
It's very derogatory, isn't it, to say something like that?
Yeah, well, that's it. But we held that against him, something terrible. But at Koitaki, after the campaign, he called an assembly like after Kokoda, and we'd been flown back to Port Moresby. He apologised. I didn't think he ever would. He said, your endurance and fighting qualities in this campaign, he said, excelled those at Gallipoli. That was Blamey, but it didn't wash with us much because he was only trying to mend his own faults. But anyhow, Gona was a shocking place. Oh God, but Buna was worse because Buna was more swampland than Gona, right on the coast, mind you. Will I tell you a little story about a patrol?
Yes, please do.
Before we established this front line at Gona, Tom said to Jack Elliott, he was my sergeant, he says, I want you to take a patrol, pick your own men, and get as close as you can to Gona village so you can see the ocean. It was right on the beach, Gona, and see if there's any movement of bringing troops in on boats in the middle of the night, because they did get some information from the natives. So I got selected to go on this patrol. And Jack was a very keen soldier, Jack Elliott. And we're creeping up to Jonah village. We're right on the left-hand side of the village. And Jack, I said, yeah, we're getting a bit close here. We could hear the Japanese talking. Well, he says he told us to get as close as we could, and providing we could look out through the trees and see the ocean, that nobody was being landed there. So we just sat there, we're like dumb, deaf mutes, and we could hear these Japanese talking and that. And I think I'd always stay there for about an hour. And he said to me, he says, Nick, he says, there's no activity here, but would you go back to Tom and tell him? That was Tom Cotton, the colonel. I said, Jack, it's nearly dark. I don't know whether I could find my way out of this bloody maelstrom of bloody jungle and tracks and that. Yes, you will. So I got to get back to the battalion headquarters. It was still light, like twilight. Anyhow, when I came out of the jungle and got onto the main track so they couldn't see me from the Japanese positions at Gona, I'm walking along there and I looked over and I saw something moving in the kunai grass. And I saw these brown helmets. It was a Japanese patrol. And I thought, geez, if they see me, I'm gone. So I dived on my side of the track and behind a trunk of tree and watched them, and they kept on going. but they weren't heading for my battalion place, the 2nd 25th Battalion. And it wasn't very long after that I heard machine guns open up from the 2nd 25th. They had sighted them. But I thought to myself, how am I going to get out of this bloody mess? Because they're retreating back. I've got to get up the track to my battalion. I thought, God, what am I going to do here? So I waited, and they kept over that side of the track in the Kuno grass. But then my battalion had been warned there had been Japanese patrol. So I'm going up the track to my own position, and I could hear them cocking the bloody machine guns, the Brens, thinking I was a bloody Jap. And I'm yelling out, Nick Carter here, Nick Carter. And they said, yes, come and show yourself. So of course, between the two, the Japs found my own mob here. And I got up to Tom, got to battalion headquarters, and then I got the greatest shock of all. He and Buttrose were the second command in the battalion. I told them what had happened. I gave them Jack's message about Whitsey. And the sea was never had a sign of anybody landing. Oh well, he says, take a couple of men with you and go back and pull Jack out. I said, Tom, I said, sir, I don't think I could go that back in the dark and find them. Oh, he said, you'd have to go. He says, we've got to get them back out of there before somebody sees them. And I think it was Buttrose. He said, I can't see any sense in sending him back now. Tom, he says, better if we wait till dawn. And Tom said, oh, okay. First light, he says, take half a dozen men and go back and pull Jack and the rest of the patrol out of that position where they're in. So I thought, this is a bit risky, but we've got to be done. Anyway, we went along the track, and where you left the track and went into the jungle, so you couldn't be seen by the Japanese. Jack Elliott and the rest of the patrol are coming out of the same position. I thought, oh, thank God for that. So we all went back, but then everybody started to collapse with malaria and bloody scrub typhus, hookworm and that. And I was really sick. I was sick, and they got word that they're going to move as many men back to Moresby in a DC-3 that was going to land at Popondetta Strip, which was about 10 minutes away. And I'm sitting there in the muster camp, and the RAP bloke come along. He says, you won't be going on that plane, Nick. I says, why? No, he said, you're going to be a medical evacuee. And I said, how long's that going to take? Oh, he says, I know, we come probably tomorrow sometimes on the next day. I said, I'm going to tell you something, Sergeant. I'm getting out of this bastard of a place. I've been here too long, and you won't stop me. But I had to walk to the airstrip with a mate of mine, Les Snelling, and geez, I didn't think I'd make it. And I said, come on, Les, we're going. And then the RAP's going, you won't make it, you won't make it. I was terrible sick. Anyhow, we'd just come over the ridge, and they were just about to close the doors on the aircraft. And we yelled out, and there was an American co-pilot and an Australian pilot. And they grabbed us and threw us up into the aircraft, no seats or anything, just bare floor that had been dropping food and that. And all I remember was all these rivets on the floor, the aluminium floor. All these rivets. They still remind me. Anyhow, I got on the plane. We got to Moresby. I stepped off the plane at Moresby. And I don't know what happened from that day to this. I've had psychiatrists examine me and everything, but there was 3 months of my life I can't remember about. But I traced what happened by asking questions. I stepped off the plane, I collapsed. They took me to the main hospital in Moresby, 2nd ninth, I think I was AGH. From there I was put on a hospital ship, taken to Brisbane. They sent me to the main hospital, repatriation hospital in Brisbane, transferred me to another hospital there, and then they were going to send me down to where the nut house factory was. And they didn't. They sent me to Toowoomba. Toowoomba, how far south is that? Because they had established a tropical diseases hospital in Toowoomba. So there was a lot of cases of scrub typhus, and hookworm and that. And that's where they discovered where I had hookworm. I was loaded with hookworm and had to be treated there. But from that day to this, I can't remember a thing about that from the time I collapsed in that plane. And the psychiatrist I saw in the DVA in Brisbane, he said, "You'll never get that back." He says, "But the brain did you a good turn." He said, "If that hadn't happened," he said, "you'd have finished up in the funny farm."